Hello. So, welcome to component 4 of the Chrysalis Diploma in Psychotherapeutic Counselling Practice. Component for this particular module 5 is understanding human relationships. So, okay, to make a start, what I will do here is just bring up some slides for us. There we are. So, okay. So the standards that we need to be aware of for this particular module is first understand relationship issues likely to arise in counselling practice, and secondly to understand ethical issues likely to arise in counselling practice. So we'll be briefly summarising these two aspects of the module today. So interpersonal relationships. Well, interpersonal relationships are important in our lives. They play a vital role in our well-being, but also important in the counselling environment, of course, because the counselling environment is a relationship. So although they play a vital role in our well-being, they can also be a major cause of stress and related distress. So philosophers say that a universal given of human experience is the tension between individual freedom and interconnectedness with others. So that's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? So, on the one hand, we perhaps recognize our own autonomy. We want our own freedom. We want to be able to move through life, reaching our own goals and so on, and to recognize what is important for us personally. But at the same time, we want to be connected with others, and being connected with others not only means that we grow as a person, and we've looked at theories in the past that have a strong bearing on how we begin to form our sense of self through our relationships. But the interconnectedness with others also brings along, possible different ways of communicating with others, what we expect from others, what others expect from us, and all kinds of possible issues and stresses, as well as some really positive human experiences. So if we think about Carl Rogers' theory for a moment, then Rogers' theory is about becoming ourselves, but at the same time, while along the way, acknowledging the compromises that we have to make. So the compromises to get along with others, to be part of our community, to be part of our family, and the rules and expectations that groups or other individuals can put on us. So, in fact, not just Rogers' theory, but all major approaches see relationships as having a major role in our lives. And relationships have a major role in therapy as well, because therapy is relationship. And the key to success in therapy lies in the therapeutic relationship. And we know this from quite extensive research that actually, the number one factor that makes a positive difference in therapy for any client is the strength of the therapeutic relationship. And that is regardless of what kind of approach we use. That's regardless of whether the therapist is using person-centered or CBT or psychodynamic. The relationship is the one factor that makes the most positive difference. And of course, our relationship is going to change depending on who we are, what type of therapy perhaps we are able to provide. The client themselves And, you know, our relationship may also change with the client over the course of therapy. So our relationship with the client may be flexible, may need to be flexible, and may need to change over time as the client is changing as well. That's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? Because quite often we can think around, well, you know, if the client is making major changes in their lives, then that may affect the relationships that they are having. So, you know, sometimes people kind of feel that their personal growth has been sort of quite a lot, and that some key people around them are actually sort of, you know, have different values now, have um, different beliefs and different thoughts about themselves. So, but if we were in sort of, you know, mid to long term therapy with a client, as the client is changing, perhaps we have to be flexible and change the relationship with the client at the same time, so that we are still offering the right level of support to the client. Okay, so as we just said, whatever therapy style we're using, the relationship is important. And as therapists, we need to examine how we are relating with the client. And in our pluralistic approach, we are very much recognizing that a collaborative style in therapy can be really important. So there we are valuing and respecting and providing the core conditions towards the client, and at the same time, we are bringing ourselves into that therapy room, and our ideas and interpretations and our suggestions as well. So a collaborative style, both working together. We're the experts perhaps in the approaches that we might be using. The client is the expert in themselves and what they want. Together, that's quite a formidable positive combination. And it involves being both congruent and using meta communication on our part. So we know about congruence, we know about, you know, being present, we know about being genuine, and, you know, we know the importance of, you know, not putting on a mask and trying to pretend that we are something that we are not trying to be the expert here, but being open with the client, being understanding and being present with the client, and doing our best to use our skills to provide empathy and those core conditions. Using meta communication. Now, what do we mean by meta communication? So meta communication is about the way we talk. So it's the act of communicating about communicating. It's being aware actually of what's happening in the therapy room and feeling comfortable to point that out to the client. It's like, well, this is what's happening. This is what we're doing here. This is how we are talking together at this moment. So it's allowing the opening of a new layer of the relationship between the therapist and the client. Now, you may be practicing meta communication in the classroom with your classmates, where, you know, where you are reflecting together, you are noticing together what is happening in your discussions, what is happening in your class exercises, what feedback you are giving to each other, what you are noticing about how you are responding together. So meta communication is, you know, it's communicating about communicating. It's shared decision making. It's shared decision making on goals. It's getting feedback from clients. It's, yeah, how are we doing? How's this going? How's this feeling for you? So, you know, how are we doing in terms of meeting those goals? What would you like to work on today? So it's reflecting on what is happening in the moment. Okay, sometimes moving beyond a comfort zone. Okay, so it's bringing a level of real honesty into the therapy room. So, you know, so we might be saying, you know, I just started to notice some really different feelings within myself when we were talking about this, and I wonder how you felt in that moment. I wonder, you know, I wonder how you feel about, you know, me telling you now that actually I felt I felt quite unheard when you very quickly dismissed that suggestion a moment ago. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's actually, you know, bringing out observation of what's actually happening in our communication into the room, on the basis that, you know, perhaps in certain therapy work for sure. You know, the client understanding more of how they are communicating with others. That understanding can grow from understanding more how they are communicating with us and how they are responding to how we're communicating with them. So there is this flow of communication that's happening, and interpretation and observation of that communication. Both therapist and client are sharing assumptions about what the client thinks and intends. And of course, you know, for our part, that is tentative. I'm curious. I wonder what you think about that. I'm curious to hear your idea about that. I wonder if I'm right in thinking this. What do you think? What's your take on this? Where are we with this? And it's talking about the process of therapy. So how are we doing? Shall we continue on this track, or do you feel that there is a better way that we could be looking at this? By taking this approach, do you think that maybe we are avoiding the topic that is the most challenging one to talk about? And I wonder what's going on there. So it's this extra level, if you like, it's this extra level of communication to discuss together the communication that's going on actually in the therapy room. So the therapeutic relationship itself. So here's a model that you may have come across before. This is the 5 relationship model from Patricia Clarkson. Now, what we're looking at here, we're looking at individual counselling, okay, so individual therapy. So this is the therapist and the client, one therapist, one client. And Clarkson has proposed that actually, you know, there are different types of therapeutic relationship. And, you know, some of these fit quite well with different therapeutic approaches. And, you know, it's not necessarily the case that we will use the same relationship type with a client all of the time. It may be that we can switch between different types of relationship as we're moving through the therapeutic process. So none of these are better than another, if you like. They all have their worth, and this is not in any kind of order. So it's not that we start off with a working alliance and then hope to move through to the transpersonal. Okay, these are different types of relationship that can exist. So at the very least, says Clarkson, there has to be a working alliance. So there has to be an agreement between client and therapist that we can work together. There has to be a fit, okay? There has to be a rapport. There has to be a rapport, and there has to be, in this sense, in the working alliance, an understanding of what we are working on together. So we're working on the client's material, not ours, for example. That we are working over perhaps a specific number of sessions. We're working on quite a specific goal or a more general idea what the client wants to work on. So we have an idea of how we're working and what work we are doing together. So the next type of relationship, the transference, counter-transference, this type of relationship, this therapeutic relationship, perhaps is more likely to occur in psychodynamic types of therapy, where we begin to pick up the dynamics that are happening, that are being brought into the room by the client, and indeed possibly by us as well. So we know what these terms mean. This is where those unconscious wishes, fears, desires are transferred onto the therapeutic relationship. So the client may begin to respond towards us as if we are another key person in their lives. And indeed, we may be responding back to them as if we are that key person in their lives. So there is, you know, some elements of projection and projective identification, which we've spoken about earlier. Okay, so yes, transference, counter-transference, and it's putting the focus onto that. So here we're coming back to the meta communication. It's like we are noticing, we are being aware of, and we are interpreting the transference and the unconscious processes that are happening within the session. So if you like, this gives us lots of really deep, valuable material. And it does this by, you know, we don't have to depend on the client telling us how their relationships are, or how they're conducting their relationships, or how their relationship with certain key people is, because it starts to play out in the therapy room. The client brings how they relate to others into the therapy room and starts to relate to us in that same way. Now, of course, we have to be very aware at this point that, the other type of countertransference is when we are actually relating to the client as if they are somebody key in our own lives. We're relating to the client in the way that we relate to others outside of the therapy room. And, so this is an example of, the importance when we're in training to actually grow our self-awareness, to develop ourselves, to understand our own processes so that we can separate out what is our stuff and what is actually happening for the client and between us in the therapy room. So the reparative or developmentally needed relationship is an intentional provision by the therapist of something that we feel as a therapist that the client needs. Okay, so it may be, for example, that we're recognizing that the client really needs very strong unconditional positive regard. It's something that has been absent from their lives, and therefore they feel that they have been growing up in an environment of criticism or negativity or abuse, and that we feel that actually if we can provide more of a much more nurturing, supportive relationship, then this may be something that is repairing something in terms of how the client is viewing themselves. It's developmentally needed. It's helping the client to move forward in a developmental stage. On the other hand, it might be that we're recognizing that we need to, that the client needs more space. The client needs more space to develop their own sense of confidence, their own ideas. So, the reparative relationship may be one of stepping back, of being very sure that we are not advising the client or directing the client, because we want to give them an opportunity to actually self-direct. So, this type of relationship perhaps is more likely to be found either in psychodynamic approaches or indeed person-centered, perhaps even in cognitive behavioral as well. So, the next type of relationship, person to person, this is where, we just feel that there is real congruence. It's a real core relationship. So there is, there is not, something that we are projecting onto each other. We're being real with each other. We're being open with each other. We're seeing the person in front of us, and the client is seeing the person in front of them. It's not an object relationship in the sense of psychodynamic theory. So there is not there is not a perception of who we are. We're both working hard to actually be the person who we are and to recognize that in each other. It's a very honest, very open relationship. And the fifth therapeutic relationship is actually quite a difficult one to describe. It's called transpersonal, and that's really where something else on a higher level seems to be occurring. There's something occurring in the therapy room. There's perhaps an emphasis on a more kind of spirituality, a more healing aspect. So there's something happening on deep levels here. And sometimes, we can really experience that with clients in the way we're communicating together, in the way we're speaking together. It's quite hard, perhaps, to pinpoint exactly how that is. And, it's something that, perhaps doesn't happen quite as often as some of the other types of relationship here. So, but as I mentioned before, so it's not necessarily the case that we will always develop one type of these relationships with a particular client. It might be that we are offering different types of therapeutic relationships within the same course of therapy with the same client, depending on client's needs at the time or depending on where the client is at the time. So psychodynamic theories of relationships. Now we learn a relationship model in year 2, and in year 2 we tended to look much more at kind of social, psychological, sociological, behavioural models of relationships. And there we were looking perhaps more at sort of behaviours, and we were looking more at theories around interaction between people and so on sort of on quite a more kind of general level. But here with psychodynamic theories of relationships, we recognize that many of the, particularly the more modern psychodynamic theories, are very much about relationships. The theories in themselves are relational. Okay. And the psychodynamic theories tend to emphasize that actually the newborn infant, for example, forms their personality through the relationship that they have with others, and in particular their core relationship, usually with their mother or primary carer. So Marler, for example, who is an object relations theorist, suggests that the newborn infant has no personality. So the personality develops through a process of psychological birth, through experiences with the mother between 6 months and 3 years. And this involves a process that perhaps, if you think back now, you can remember to when we looked in module 1 at Melanie Klein's object relations theories. So that process of development that the infant starts to go through right from the moment of birth, which is a process of separation, individuation that continues throughout life, and particularly comes into play at key periods in our life, perhaps adolescence, marriage, parenthood, where we are with significant others, where we are forming those relationships that are romantic relationships with others. So these experiences, these very early experiences with our key carer, form the building blocks of later romantic relationships. So this is important here, because very often if clients are coming to therapy with a relationship issue, and here what we're doing is, this is involved in working with individual clients, okay, not couples counselling. We look at that as a specialist area, something that you may want to go on and train in after your core qualification. But working with individuals, so recognizing that early experiences in this model have formed the building blocks of later romantic relationships. So clients may suggest to us, for example, that they get on really well with their friendship group, they get on well with their colleagues at work, they've always had a good kind of general friendship group, but when it comes to their close personal relationships, they find that the experiences there are more challenging, perhaps. And so this model is saying that if these early experiences are not good, then the child internalizes and represses their frustration of the loved stroke hated parent as unconscious introjects. So remembering back here that the very young child in Klein's model tends to split objects, objects that they are in relationship with, split objects into good and bad objects, and tends to project out or suppress or repress the bad objects. Okay, and the bad objects are those that are sources of frustration or anger or anxiety. Okay, and later on we can continue to still have within us this same unconscious process where we project these unconscious introjects onto others. So we see our hostility towards ourselves as coming from others, for example. So we see our own anger or our own frustration in other people because we have projected it onto them and they've identified with it, and now they are kind of acting that back to us. So this is obviously a really complex process. It's an unconscious process. It's an unconscious process that is happening with both partners, and we need to remember that as well. So while one partner is unconsciously projecting their frustrations onto their partner, the partner is doing the same back as well. So there's lots of complications possibly going on here that are all being driven unconsciously. So Maylark Pines has, written a really excellent book on falling in love. It's a very well-researched book. It is on your reading list. And she suggests that falling in love is an unconscious choice of a partner who fits a repressed, split-off part of ourself. So let's just think about that for a moment. So it's almost like, and people speak in terms of our other half, don't we? Our other half, our better half, okay? So okay, an unconscious choice of a partner who fits a repressed, split-off part of ourselves. So it's almost like we are trying to, we're trying to repair something by adding something here, but it's not repairing within ourselves. It's trying to compensate, if you like. She goes on to say that a person who feels unlovable because she felt unlovable as a child will choose a partner who doesn't show love. Then she can blame the partner for her bad feelings about herself. So she's made this unconscious choice. So, and then there is this repeating pattern, and then there is this confirmation pattern. It's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? So if a client is arriving at therapy and is complaining a lot about their partner and how their partner behaves towards them or their attitude towards them and so on, it's an interesting thing for perhaps a therapist to just hold there. It's like, okay, so why has the client chosen that partner? What's the need for this partner? What, interestingly, is the need or the split off part here that is being expressed by the partner that can't be expressed by the person themselves? So a person who feels unlovable because she felt unlovable as a child is choosing a partner who will continue to help the client to feel unlovable. Okay, but she can then blame the partner for making her feel that she's unlovable. So with these kind of dynamics, again, the transference and the counter-transference that we can identify in the sessions can be brought into the sessions and hopefully worked through the client. So, and this is going to depend on the therapist being aware of our own feelings, as we were saying before, and separating out our own feelings to those feelings that we are being given. So, is our client actually projecting onto us something where we're picking up feelings around this client? We're picking up feelings of finding this client sort of quite difficult to love, for example. So, okay, the client possibly therefore projecting feelings onto others, projecting feelings onto us in therapy. The object relations approach, which is the approach that we're looking at here, says that we as human beings are motivated by a need to create and maintain relationships, and part of this need is that we are projecting these feelings that we can't accept about ourselves or within ourselves onto another. And the projective identification, as we've just mentioned before, happens when we start to recognize that we are being pulled into responding in a certain way. So this is similar to transactional analysis as well, isn't it? Where we get hooked into a particular ego state. So pulled into responding in a certain way towards the client, okay? And, this can be an indication for both us and the clients that this is what the client is doing. The client is inducing other people to respond in a particular way. And we can note that because the client is inducing us to respond in a particular way. So we're putting a prime focus here on the client and therapist relationship. It's the relationship that's happening in the room that is important in these circumstances. And we're putting the focus on the here and now of the therapeutic relationship. And that's important, okay, because we can mistakenly believe that psychodynamic theory is all about talking to the client about their past, and it's not. So in many cases, in object relations, for example, we recognize that the client has very little to say about their past because they don't know what their past is at the age of 4 months or 6 months or a year. Okay, so, you know, and our memories are not developed in that sense. Our sense of awareness is not developed in that sense, but we're working on the basis that the patterns have continued and have now become the process for the client. So we're putting the focus on what we are experiencing and what we are observing and what we are interpreting of the client-therapist relationship. And in the therapy room together with the client, we are putting the focus on the here and now, what's actually happening now in the therapeutic relationship. Okay, so now taking object relations theory into adulthood. So, the theorists have recognized that, okay, so yeah, the patterns that have been formed very early on in our lives are now driving our important intimate relationships in the here and now. So, you know, so one of the things we looked at in year 2, for example, is whether the client can identify patterns in their current and their previous relationships. Do they find that they are responding the same way? Do they find that they have the same feelings towards their partners? Do they find that the communication takes on the same kind of difficulties or ease? So it's okay. So, you know, it's recognizing that there is an unconscious drive here, there is a thread here that is kind of driving responses forward. So in object relations theory, relationship has center stage in the development of the mind. Humans are motivated by a need to create and maintain relationships. And object relations theory focuses on how our individual internal object relations influence our actual relationships with others. So it's how we perceive relationships, it's how we act in relationships, it's what we expect from relationships. And it's what we expect from ourselves in relationships as well. So there's all these dynamics going back and forward, okay, that are about perception, that are about, you know, how we are presenting a window through to our world, if you like. So in therapy, we would consider the therapeutic relationship as a mirror of other relationships and projective identifications, patterns of interpersonal behaviours induce the other person, in our case the therapist, to respond in a particular way. And so the therapist/client relationship is a here and now relationship which has the greatest potential to change, and so becomes the focus of change because, of course, we can help the client to be aware of what's happening between us. So we're back to meta communication again. We're back to, you know, bringing into a therapy room, if you like, an observation aspect of what's happening between us. And we can here perhaps note the importance of supervision, where supervision, if you like, is another tool that we can use for the supervisor to provide a new objective stance, a third-party perspective on noting to us in supervision what's happening, what they're picking up from what we're describing as happening between how we're relating to the client and how the client is relating to us. So object relations theory, Kashdan, has a theory of the types of projective identifications that we most often see. There's 4 different ones that we most often see, okay? And most often see where unhealthy early object relations may have been present. So in other words, you know, there's something going on here within the current relationship that is being driven by past dynamics and past experiences. So the dependency type of relationship, for example, is the person who is, is not feeling their own power. It's like they're giving their power away in the relationship. So what should I do? What do you think? Okay, let's do that. Now, this is often the case, perhaps, with clients who come to therapy, especially, there will be a proportion of clients who are expecting us to fix things for them. A proportion of clients who are asking us what we think they should do, and perhaps we can pick up then this idea of, perhaps they have a dependency pattern in relationships. They tend to rely a lot on the other person to make decisions, not just within the relationship, but also on behalf of them as well. They're not taking a responsibility here. They're not feeling their own autonomy. They're not feeling their own power. The flip side of that is the power pattern. Okay, the power pattern. Do what I say. I'm right. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing things. Your thoughts aren't important. What I think is right. Okay, so this power pattern here, and of course, again, this can be present in the therapeutic relationship. So we can get into, a frame of mind with a client that, okay, they just need to be shown the right way. They need to, they need to be guided here. They clearly aren't understanding that their self-defeating behaviors are a real issue for them and they should stop this immediately. And, I will explain to them how they're going to do that here. So, and we can, mistakenly believe at the beginning of our studies that actually, this is what therapy is about. It is an unequal relationship in the therapy room, and we hold the power because we are the expert, we've had the training, and we know what the client needs. So, but Kashdan identifies this as an unhealthy projective pattern, okay? So the sexuality pattern, okay, the sexuality pattern is where in intimate relationships, sex is the most important thing. So, the client is coming to therapy, they are concerned that, the sex isn't good enough, that their partner will leave them if there isn't a certain frequency of sex, or if it isn't always really amazing and wonderful. And, so we might say, well, perhaps this one is less likely to appear in the therapy room, but actually that's not necessarily going to be the case. So, as a therapist, we can find ourselves sort of, strangely drawn to a client when we know that that isn't ethical and we know that, that isn't professional, but we are there being professional by picking up. It's like, well, how very interesting here that, I'm being drawn into this kind of flirtatious relationship and that the client is being flirtatious. And it's almost as if the client can't help it, And, so sex becomes the most important thing. And, we can understand that, this can be a challenge for a couple, in many ways. So the fourth pattern is ingratiation. And, again, we can often see this appearing in the therapy room. It might well start in the sense of the clients, feeling sort of, quite uncomfortable emotions, complaining about their partner. It's like, I try so hard, I give them everything. I really work at it. I really work at the relationship. And, and they really don't seem to value that. They don't seem to respect that. They don't seem to even see it. And, I'm really working to make things easy for them and to give them everything that they need. And, why aren't I getting that back? And Kashdan is saying that actually, this is an interesting one because in a sense, this is not for the partner, it's for the person who is feeling this way. It's like, I want you to feel gratitude towards me. I want you to feel sort of, beholden to me. So, and perhaps, very often what the client is missing here, the person who has this pattern is missing here, it's like, well, I'm not necessarily listening to the partner. I'm not necessarily making things any easier for them. I'm just trying to make things easier for myself. I'm not doing anything that they're asking me to do. If I were to ask them what they need, they might say, I don't need anything, I'm fine. Let's just do our thing. We're fine together. It's like, well, okay, so where does that leave me then? It's like, does that leave me in a position where I just feel, unwanted, incapable, not needed? Okay. So, the 4 patterns here are projective identifications. And, again, in the therapy room, how would ingratiation play itself out? Well, perhaps the client that is trying hard for us, that we get that sense, we start to get that sense that what they're doing doesn't feel really genuine. It doesn't feel really real. It doesn't feel like they are working on their behalf. It feels like they're working on our behalf. They want to please us. They don't want us to be disappointed that therapy isn't working for them. They would rather say to us that it is working and believe that it is working, or want us to believe that it is working, rather than, being able to honestly and genuinely say, can we take a different approach here, because I'm not sure where we're going here and it's not working for me. And, to not think about hurting our feelings, if you like. Okay, so now another psychodynamic theory that we can look at in terms of working with clients with relationship issues is attachment theory. And, attachment theory is something that we've touched on a little bit in the past. And attachment theory is another key psychodynamic theory. It's the work of John Bowlby, but again, like other theories, it's also the work of other theorists as well. So, here, once again, Bowlby takes the psychodynamic approach that early childhood experiences have a profound impact on later intimate relationships. And that Bowlby is looking at that stable relationship in a slightly different way to how Klein is, for example, and saying, okay, well, it's attachment. Attachment is the first stable relationship that the baby develops. And interestingly, Bowlby looks at this as the baby developing it, not the adult developing it. So, the baby has all of those sort of, innate and inbuilt responses. So, smiling, giggling, just in themselves being cute, making eye contact, really looking at somebody, bonding. This is an innate process, says Bowlby, for the newborn infant, and the first stable relationship. And we have this inbuilt tendency to create a stable relationship because we need it. We need it because as an infant, we are helpless. We need help. We need somebody to care for us and to ensure that we're okay. So a stable, consistent relationship, a good relationship, a loving relationship, a caring relationship, a relationship where the child is getting needs met, a good enough relationship, okay, is what Winnicott would say, okay. So a stable, consistent relationship will develop a sense of security. And as an adult, we will then feel comfortable and secure in relationships. So, this goes back to, that sort of early philosophical point that we looked at, doesn't it? Where, our personal growth, our development, if you like, is that interplay and sometimes conflict between, on the one hand, wanting and needing to be autonomous and independent, and on the other hand, also being able to be vulnerable and secure and to provide for others and have others providing for us. So a sense of security, and as an adult, we feel comfortable and secure in relationships, as well as, when we're not necessarily in a relationship. So in therapy, attachment theorists propose that the therapist becomes an important attachment figure. And that this attachment figure can be internalized as an attachment model to clients, so therefore helping clients to build feelings of safety and trust. So if we think back to Clarkson's different relationship types, and remember that type, which was the developmentally needed or reparative relationship, then here's an example of that. So here, what we're doing as a therapist is we are providing a secure base for the client. And from that secure base, the client can start to feel more comfortable to explore their own feelings, to explore their own thoughts, to explore their own anxieties and so on, and to feel that they're doing that from within a place of safety and of trust. We are holding the space for them. Okay, so so here in therapy, we're recognizing an attachment theory that if somebody doesn't have, those really those important, stable, consistent relationships early on, then that will have had an impact throughout their life. And then the process of therapy can hopefully provide a new secure base where the client can begin to develop and grow and develop their own sense of self and self-worth from that secure base. So it's a reparative relationship. So Bowlby, through research and with others, and actually defined 4 different types of attachment styles that we generally find. Okay, so the first is the one that we have been talking about, where where there's been a stable and consistent relationship within which the young child to grow and develop and to mature. So a secure attachment style is one where there is an ease of becoming emotionally close to others, an ease to depend on others, and also to have others depend on us. It's also an ease to be alone and to not worry about whether we are being accepted by others. So there is a big element of self-acceptance and self-worth and self-love here as well. So the secure individual, if you like, is secure to be comfortable on their own. They're comfortable within relationships, and they're comfortable to give and take within relationships as well. They're comfortable to feel vulnerable. They're comfortable to depend on others. They're comfortable to have others depend on them as well. So, on the other hand, the fearful avoidant attachment style is where somebody feels somewhat uncomfortable getting close to others. Now, the person wants emotionally close relationships, but they have a difficulty in bringing in that vulnerability. They find it difficult to depend on others or to trust others. There is a fear of being hurt. Okay, so there may be a fear here of getting too involved in a relationship. So interestingly, somebody with a fearful avoidant attachment style may actually have quite a history of a lot of relationships, but is avoiding really connecting with somebody, because if they get really involved with somebody, if they really fall in love, then there's always the fear of being hurt. Best to keep things more on the surface. So there is less trust here in the fearful avoidance style. So, however, but as we said, they want emotional closeness, okay, whereas in the dismissing avoidant attachment style, there is a discomfort with close relationships. So there is a discomfort with actually wanting a relationship. There is stepping away from relationships completely. There is more importance being placed on independence and self-sufficiency. It's like, I don't need anybody, I'm better on my own. I don't need to be with somebody. I always work better when I'm doing things for myself, okay? And and people may be extremely capable and extremely independent and extremely self-sufficient, but Bowlby is saying that quite possibly in this dismissing avoidant attachment style, behind that may be an anxiety, maybe a vulnerability, a fear of being vulnerable, and again, so a fear of being hurt. The fourth attachment style, the preoccupied attachment style is a desire to be emotionally intimate with others, but finding actually perhaps or perceiving that others don't want to get as close as we do. So we may well think then that others don't value us as much as we value them, and will feel a discomfort without a close relationship, and we will be preoccupied with the relationship. We might be coming to therapy to really, to find out what we can do about the relationship, what's going wrong. I need to understand this, or I need to understand what went wrong before. I don't want this to happen again. And, very often people can, really kind of act out this preoccupation with the relationship. So the clients can sort of, can discuss with us that, they have lots of conversations with their partner about the relationship, how the relationship should be, how it should be better, how it needs to be better. Is it still okay? Do we have a problem here? And then, the relationship almost becomes, the topic of the relationship. So Bowlby recognized these attachment styles, okay, it's also important to just touch a little bit on, what we mean by an intimate relationship, and very often within a very close intimate relationship, not always of course, but very often, what one factor that is just defining an intimate relationship is that it's a sexual relationship as well. So, so there is a section in your module notes that is talking about the sexual side of the relationship, okay, and what it means for both partners. So sex therapy in itself is often, taking a behavioural approach. We would consider it to be a specialist area for many clients who are struggling with the sexual side of their intimate relationship, either as an individual or as a couple. For many clients, the sexual side of their intimate relationship is very important, and issues in the relationship may also be sexual ones, or sexual issues in the relationship might bring in, other issues within the relationship. So the two tend to go hand in hand quite often. So sex in the relationship, so therefore may be something that a client would go to a specialist sex therapist for assistance, or the couple may go to a specialist sex therapist for assistance. But also there is there is a very wide range of issues that can be assisted, really just allowing the client to feel, first of all, comfortable to talk about the sexual side of their relationship, and to work out perhaps how they're perceiving the sexual side of the relationship, how they are perceiving their sexual experience, how they are perceiving sex itself, how they are communicating their sexual needs or desires, or feelings or behavior or beliefs about sex with their partner. And a lot of that we can assist the client in regular therapy. So a lot of sexual issues that clients can experience can actually come down to poor communication, or how somebody is perceiving their sexual experience, or their expectations. And clients need to recognize as well that that sexual drives and sexual experience don't necessarily stay the same throughout the entire relationship, and won't stay the same throughout their entire life. So there are changes in sexual drives, and these can be for many reasons. These can be for many environmental or physical reasons. And if a client is talking to you and asking you for help in about a sexual issue, then you do need to, to have a good, frank conversation with them about what's actually happening, and to offer the possibility that, in many cases, that this can be a symptom of something else. It can be something that is physical, that is quite easily dealt with, can be a side effect of medication, for example. So it can also be you know, a response to something that is going on otherwise in the client's life. So the client may be experiencing low mood, for example, a low motivation, a lack of energy. The client may be, you know, within grief. Or bereavement, okay, and you know, different life changes and stresses, for example, have effects on, you know, on the sexual drive. So, and you know, and many people might not necessarily understand that, and to understand that, you know, these types of changes are normal. So, you know, and issues can actually occur at different stages in the sexual response cycle. And this diagram here over the left-hand side of your screen is the sexual response cycle. So, and the sexual response cycle here starts off with desire. Okay, so you know, people can have, you know, a really healthy sense of sexual desire, or they can find that that's diminished over time for whatever reason. So desire, so fantasies about sexual activity, there's the desire to have sexual activity, so actually desiring sex. Okay, so the next part of the cycle is the sexual excitement. So there is, you know, there is a subjective sexual pleasure here. There are physiological changes within the body. There are those very comfortable, very nice feelings. There is, you know, there's action happening. Okay, so you know, this is the excitement phase, and the excitement phase, of course, you know, tends to build. It tends to build, and you know, reaches that peak that we call orgasm, and that's the peaking of the sexual pleasure and the physiological peak as well. So, and you know, and from that stage of orgasm, then you know, generally, so you know, resolution. So you know, we know, of course, that orgasm can, you know, can continue and can repeat itself in some cases. Okay, but you know, at some point there is a resolution there. There is a relaxation. There is a muscular relaxation, and there is that general sense of well-being. So there is a resolution there. Okay. And you know, so changes in desire, in excitement, in orgasm, you know, can lead to, you know, to difficulties for the individual and for the couple, and you know, those can be looked at in therapy. So I'll just go back to that slide for a moment and just sort of finish this off. So in the notes there is you know, there is a long section on the sexual side of the relationship, and you know, and a recap of some of the material that you have looked at in year 2 and possibly year 1 as well, in terms of sexual dysfunction. So dysfunctions that can happen at desire stage, at excitement stage, at orgasm stage for either male or female, and you know, and how to address those. But in sort of, you know, in regular client therapist therapy that's not specialist sex therapy, you know, very often, so you know, very often issues with a sexual relationship can occur, you know, due to distorted beliefs, due to some negative prior experiences, due to sort of expectations, and due to you know, poor communication, so that the client can hold, you know, beliefs and attitudes and thoughts around, you know, around their sexual experience that can be sort of quite unrealistic and quite anxiety provoking as well. And perhaps there's, you know, there's going to be, you know, nothing more of a passion killer, for example, if somebody is suddenly overwhelmed by negative thoughts about, you know, their performance and how it needs to be and how it must be, and how, you know, how their partner is going to think that they are ridiculous or just unworthy unless they can perform in a certain way, and their partner would never understand unless it's amazing every time, and all these kinds of things. So, you know, a lot can be assisted by opening up, you know, good open communication with the client about this, and assisting the client to have better communication with their partners as well. Okay, so I'm going to, you know, to leave looking at relationship work here. But just before we close today, just looking just very briefly at a section that you have in the notes relating to ethics and good practice, looking at the law and ethics around therapy, and in particular just looking at ethics and values. Okay, so we tend to understand what we mean by ethics. So ethics may relate to laws, not necessarily. They are principles by which we are guided. They are guidance that we are given through our professional register, through our guidance within the classroom, through our guidance while we are on placement, and through supervision. So, and ethics is important for us to understand because it is about good professional practice. A central issue in counselling is to do with the power in the relationship, and obviously counselling is a very private process, and so clients don't necessarily know what to expect. They're coming to therapy really having perhaps no idea at all about how this relationship is going to work out, and it's only right that we give them clarity, and we're very clear with them about what we offer, what our fees are, what the terms are that we operate within, what can be negotiated, how this relationship is going to work, but remembering that this is a professional relationship. We are being paid, or in some way getting value from that for ourselves. Okay, and that and then there is a possibility here that that relationship could be quite controlling. So clients have a right to self-determination. They should feel valued. They should not feel criticised. They should not feel judged. They should not feel belittled. And all of this, of course, goes back to those core conditions that we work so hard to really perfect when we're working with a client. So values are those generic principles that underpin counselling. Okay, so they are broader than perhaps having an ethical relationship with the client. They are the broad ideals really that bring us to wanting to do counselling work. So these broad generic principles include things like, respecting the rights of the individual, respecting the dignity of the individual, so protecting the safety of the individual, to wanting to alleviate distress and suffering. Starting off the principle in the medical profession, do no harm, but then going on much further than that to the concept of beneficence, okay, where, we want to alleviate distress and suffering. We appreciate the variety of human experience, but we appreciate too that that if we can do something, if we can offer our services, if we can be in service to do what we can to alleviate distress and suffering, then that's what we feel compelled to do. At the same time, we're not being judgmental, we are not being directive here, we are appreciating the huge variety of human experience and culture and upbringing. Okay, so values are not intended to be specific, but they set a philosophical context for all of our therapy work. So there continues, and in perhaps in particular in the person-centered approach, there continues to be an interesting debate about how much we can acquire and develop a range of personal qualities, and how much of these rely on our individual personality traits and our capacity to change. So this brings us back to those really early reflections that we did at the beginning of our counselling training. So, can we actually learn empathy? Can we learn unconditional positive regard? Or are these innate qualities? So Rogers would say that it's a combination of both. Perhaps we come to the profession of counselling with strong values in terms of respecting every human being, or with valuing every human being. but we also can develop, we can develop those skills that support that and underpin that as well. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. I hope that this has been of assistance to you and has been of value to you. So we will end this lecture now. And of course, if you have any questions about this, then do ensure that you're giving your online and your class notes a thorough read, and any supporting textbooks that that you're being directed towards. And of course, these theories are for discussion within your class, and any questions you have, your tutor will be able to answer those. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again soon. And thank you. Goodbye.